Chapter 3 Khandhas Paticcasamuppada Present Aspect. The late Maha Thera Mogok Sayadaw had expounded the Khandha Paticcasamuppada for the benefit of the yogis. This can be called a shortcut to the contemplation or meditation work for the yogis because it teaches the present aspects of working of the doctrine. In other words, it enables a yogi to understand the khandhas, their beginning, their causes, and dissolution. In Pali it runs thus: Chakuncha paticca rupecha upajati chakyu vinyanam tinam sangati paso pasa pachaya vedana vedana pachaya tanha tanha pachaya upadanam upadanam pachaya bhavo bhava pachaya jati jati pachaya jara marana sukha parideva dukkha do manasa upayasa sambhavanti eva metasa kevalasa dukkha khandhasa samudayo hoti satancha paticca sadecha upajati sota vinyanam gananche paticca gandhahecha upajati vinyanam jivancha paticca pasecha upajati jiva vinyanam kayancha paticca putabhabecha dhammecha upajati mano vinyanam tinam samudayo hoti. Chakuncha means eye, rupecha means visible objects. When the impingement of two phenomena takes place, there arises chakku vinyanam, eye consciousness. It is to be noted that there is only the arising of eye consciousness in which there is no eye. He or she who sees, there is no seer. There is no I, he or she in the eye or in the visible object. There is I, he or she in the I consciousness. I consciousness is only no more or no less, and this I consciousness should not be confused with I, he or she, or it must not be personified. The combination of I, visible object, and I consciousness gives rise to contact, phassa, and depending on eye contact there arises vedana, and in vedana there is no I, he, she, or you. Because of vedana there arises tanha, because of tanha there arises upadana, grasping or clinging, and depending on upadana there arises kaya kama, physical action, vachi kama, verbal action, and mano kama, thought or mental action. Depending on kama bhava there arises jati, rebirth. By jati it may imply Nakha Sika Sutta Samyut Nikaya Apaya Jati, birth in woeful existence. Depending on jati, there arises jara, marana, old age, decay, sorrow, lamentations, pain, grief, and despair. Thus there arises the whole mass of suffering. So tancha, paticca, sadecha, upajati means ear and audible object cause the arising of sota vijnana. Similarly, ganancha, paticca, jivancha, paticca, kayancha, paticca, manacha, paticca should be understood with their respective sense doors and objects. The aforementioned is the Khandhas Paticcasamuppada as expounded by the late Maha Thera Sayadaw. For the purpose of clarification and lucidity, it will be better to explain in conventional parlance. When A sees a beautiful object, he desires it, he clings it, and he makes an effort to obtain. For example, he sees a beautiful object, he wants to have it. This is tanha, because it is the desire to own, and he is overwhelmed by the intense desire to possess, and clings to it. This is upadana. Again, our takes all sorts of effort, i.e. mental, verbal and physical. This is kama bhava. The reader is advised to refer to the diagram and recite the Pali text. Kama bhava pachaya jati means jati arises depending on kama bhava. Jati pachaya jara marana sukha parideva dukkha domanasa upayasa sambhavanti means because of jati there arises old age, death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and despair. Thus the train of Paticcasamuppada evolves, or in other words, this is the evolutionary process of a single train of Paticcasamuppada, which is nothing but the arising and disappearing of khandhas, and these very khandhas are nothing but dukkha itself, or the whole train or series of dukkha. It will be obvious to the thoughtful reader how many times in a day do we partake ourselves in this process, in this ceaseless process of arising of tanha, upadana, and kama bhava, or in conventional parlance, we see, we desire, and we are overwhelmed by the intense craving and attachment. And for this we commit three kinds of actions, i.e. mental, verbal, and physical. In the same manner, when we hear something, if we like or enjoy it, it is tanha, and when we are overwhelmed by the intense craving, it is upadana. And when we commit three kinds of actions, this is called kama bhava. The same analogy applies to smelling, tasting, touching, and thinking. Consciously or unconsciously, we fall into these processes from sunrise until we fall asleep. The reader should at least turn his attention to the fact that Paticcasamuppada is nothing but his own line of actions, and focus his thought once again on khandhas, and see whether his line of action is categorically within this causal law and in accordance with the doctrine Paticcasamuppada. If he thinks it is time to stop his line of actions in accordance with Paticcasamuppada, there is the way to get out of samsara. If he continues to carry on as usual, the cycle of Paticcasamuppada will go on and continue its relentless process of sorrow, suffering, lamentation, and despair and the whole mass of dukkha, suffering. When there is impact of eye and visible object, there arises eye consciousness. Yogis are advised to observe the eye consciousness, whether it still remains, passes away or vanishes. It will be seen after observation that the same eye consciousness has already passed away or disappeared when it was observed by observing consciousness. It will be obvious to the observer that the eye consciousness was no more to be found because its arising was momentary. In like manner, whenever there is eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, or thought consciousness, the arising must be observed by the next observing consciousness, knowledge. It is to be borne in the mind that when the observing consciousness arises, the arising of the eye consciousness, or whatever consciousness has already vanished and disappeared, because two parallel lines of consciousness never exist. Annam appajate cittang anyang cittang nirujati. This means only one consciousness can be arisen at a time. Therefore, yogis are advised to observe or contemplate that whatever khandha arises, be it rupa, vedana, sanya, sankara, vinyanam, consciousness, the arising is only momentary because it arises to disappear or pass away. This is exactly what your or our khandhas are undergoing. Every arising is momentary, as old khandhas vanishes, giving rise to new, and the same process goes on ad infinitum. Should a yogi miss observing or contemplating an eye consciousness, there will arise tanha, and if he misses again observing or contemplating tanha, there will follow inevitably upadana, grasping or clinging. He should observe and contemplate on upadana. If he fails to do so, there will follow kamabhava, and when kamabhava arises, jati, jara, mara, and marana will inevitably follow. Hence the revolving of Paticcasamuppada ad infinitum. Here is another illustration according to the Pali text. Sotana paticca sadesa upajati sota vinyanam tinam sangati passo passa pachaya vedana hoti. One hears the call of this little son on his return to school. As soon as he hears it, he feels so anxious to see the sun, and moreover he is so anxious to hug him and caress and kiss him that he does all the fondling. He may think and say that he does all this because it is his own son and he loves him. There is no offence or sin against him because he does not transgress any moral law. The truth, however, is that the inexorable process of Paticcasamuppada has been going on and continuing its ceaseless cycle. To elucidate how Paticcasamuppada starts revolving on hearing the voice of the young son returning from school, is the voice of the young son is heard, and as soon as the voice is heard, there arise tanha, craving to see, fondle and caress him. Because of the craving, there arises the overwhelming desire to fondle and caress the sun. This caressing and fondling is kama bhava paccaya jati. Because of kama bhava, birth arises. Reference to the connection between section 3 and section 4 of the diagram will show it. When kama bhava, karmic force, arises, jati is bound to follow. Kama balam sabanu buddhapi patibanutam nasa kanti. Even the Buddhas are not able to stop the karmic forces. From dawn to dusk, the process goes on. When an attractive object is seen, tanha arises, tanha craving, and because of tanha there arises upadana, and because of upadana kama bhava, karmic force, arises. And as such, the whole train of the cycle of Paticcasamuppada goes on in its ceaseless revolution. When a pleasant tune is heard, there arises craving, and because of craving there arises upadana, kama bhava, jati, jara, marana, and so on, and the whole train of the cycle of Paticcasamuppada goes on its relentless revolution. Similarly, when one smells a pleasant odor, tastes a pleasant taste, touches a pleasant object, and reflects a pleasant idea, there arises of tanha, upadana, kama bhava, jati, jara, jati, mara, marana, soka, parideva, dukkha, upayasa, dukkha, somanasa, and the whole mass of sorrow and suffering. In fact, whenever a beautiful object, pleasant sound, pleasant odor, pleasant taste, pleasant touch, and pleasant idea enter through the 6 sense doors, tanha will arise, and a series of other factors. Such series of processes are nothing but kilesa vata, which in turn gives rise to kama vata, from which again emanates vipaka vata, thus making the round of 3 vatas. Reference should be made to the diagram avijja, tanha, upadana, or kilesa vata, while sankhara and kamabhava from kama vaya and vijnana, namarupa, salayatana, pasa, vedana, jati, jara, marana constitute vipakavati vata. Similarly, ganancha, paticca, jivancha, paticca, kayancha, paticca, and manancha, paticca may be taken as kanda paticcasamuppada, which should be observed and contemplated by vipassana meditation. Otherwise, the whole train of ceaseless process of cycle of samsara will continue ad infinitum, bringing in its wake the whole mass of sorrow and suffering.